Jake's old transport ship made a horrible grinding noise before coming to a complete stop. He looked at the control panel and sighed. The red warning lights were flashing like crazy, and smoke was coming from the engine compartment. After 3 months of traveling alone through space, collecting plant samples from different planets, this was not what he wanted to see. He checked his location and found the nearest place to get help was Colony Station 47. It wasn't a fancy place, just a small research station on the edge of known space. But it had a repair shop, and that's all he needed right now. When Jake docked his broken ship at the station, he noticed something odd. Every person he saw working on the loading dock was a woman. The security guard who checked his papers was a woman. The mechanic who looked at his ship was a woman too. He thought maybe it was just coincidence. The station was smaller than he expected. It had about 50 people living there, mostly scientists and engineers. The walls were painted a boring gray color, and everything felt very practical and simple. There were no fancy decorations or comfortable areas to relax. Jake found the main dining area and ordered some coffee. The food wasn't great, but the coffee was surprisingly good. He sat at a table near the window and watched ships coming and going. Most of them were cargo vessels bringing supplies to the station. That's when Dr. Lisa Rodriguez walked over to his table. She was the station's head scientist, a woman in her 30s with short black hair and kind eyes. She seemed genuinely interested in meeting someone new. "You're not from around here," she said with a smile, sitting down across from him. "We don't get many visitors who aren't delivery crews." Jake explained he was a plant researcher, traveling from planet to planet to study how different environments affected plant growth. He had been working alone for months, documenting rare species that might be useful for medicine or food production. Lisa listened with real interest. She asked smart questions about his research and shared stories about the work they were doing. At the station, they talked for over an hour, and Jake found himself enjoying the conversation more than he had expected. Then Lisa said something that stopped him cold. "You know, you're pretty lucky to be out here traveling alone," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "Human guys like you are really hard to find these days, especially this far from Earth." Jake didn't understand what she meant. "What do you mean hard to find?" Lisa looked surprised. "You really don't know about what happened 5 years ago?" Jake shook his head. He had been focused on his research, often spending months in remote areas with no contact with civilization. News from the outside world rarely reached him. Lisa's expression became serious. "There was a virus, not the kind that makes you sick and die, but one that affected men's ability to have children. It spread through most of the outer colonies before anyone realized what was happening." She explained that the virus had made it very difficult for men to father children. The government had moved most healthy men back to the core worlds near Earth, where they could be protected and receive medical treatment. The colonies were left with mostly women. "How many men are still out here?" Jake asked, feeling confused. "On this station, you're looking at the first one I've seen in over a year," Lisa said. "In this whole sector, maybe a few dozen at most. Most colonies have none at all." Jake felt a strange chill run down his spine. He had never thought about himself as rare or special. He was just a guy who liked studying plants. But apparently, his very existence had become something unusual. Lisa offered to help him get his ship repaired. She knew the station's engineer well and could make sure he got good service. She also invited him to stay in one of the guest rooms while work was being done. "The repairs might take a few days," she said. "The parts you need aren't common, and we'll have to order them from the next supply run." Jake accepted her offer. Gratefully, he was tired of sleeping in his cramped ship anyway. As Lisa showed him round the station, Jake noticed how the other women looked at him, not in a threatening way, but with curiosity and something that felt like hope. They were all friendly and welcoming, maybe more than he was used to. Dr. Maria Santos, the medical officer, insisted on giving him a complete health checkup, saying it was station policy. Captain Anna Williams, who ran security, made sure he had everything he needed and gave him a personal tour of the safety systems. Engineer Chen Wei personally looked at his ship and promised to take extra good care of the repairs. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to have him there. That evening, Lisa invited Jake to dinner in her private quarters. She had cooked a real meal, not the processed food they served in the dining hall. They talked about their work, their dreams, and their experiences living in space. "It gets lonely out here," Lisa admitted as they finished eating. "We have each other, but it's not the same as having a complete community. We're missing something important." Jake was starting to understand that he represented more than just a visitor to these people. He was a reminder of what their community used to be like, and maybe what it could be again. As the night went on, Lisa's attention became more focused on him. She asked about his plans, where he was going next, and how long he usually stayed in one place. Her questions felt like more than just polite conversation. When Jake mentioned he would probably leave as soon as his ship was fixed, he noticed Lisa's smile fade just a little. "You know," she said carefully, "we have some really interesting research projects here, things you might find fascinating. Maybe you don't need to rush off so quickly." Jake thanked her for the offer, but said he had commitments on other planets. People were expecting him to deliver his research findings. Lisa nodded. But something in her eyes had changed. It was subtle, but Jake could sense it. She seemed to be thinking about something, planning something. As he walked back to his guest room that night, Jake felt like his life had suddenly become much more complicated. He had gone from being a lonely researcher to being someone important, someone valuable. The feeling was both flattering and a little scary. He didn't know it yet, but Lisa was already making plans to convince him to stay longer. She had been thinking about the station's future, about what they needed to survive and grow. And now she believed she had found the answer walking around her station. Jake fell asleep thinking about his conversation with Lisa. He was looking forward to getting his ship fixed and continuing his journey. He had no idea that Lisa was already talking to the engineer about finding reasons to delay those repairs. The next morning would bring new discoveries about just how much his presence meant to the people of Station 47 and how far they were willing to go to keep him there. The next morning, Jake woke up to find a message waiting for him. Lisa had arranged access to the station's research archives, something she normally didn't do for visitors. She explained that they had collected data on plant species from dozens of worlds over the past 10 years, information that would be incredibly valuable for his research. Jake couldn't believe his luck. This kind of data would save him months of work. He spent the morning in the archives, copying files and taking notes. The collection was amazing, far better than anything he could have hoped to find out. Around lunchtime, Lisa stopped by to check on him. She brought sandwiches and coffee, saying she didn't want him to waste time walking to the dining hall. As they ate, she told him more about the station's work and the people who live there. "Let me introduce you to the rest of our team," Lisa said. "I think you'll find them interesting." First, she took him to meet Dr. Kim Patel, the station's medical officer. Kim was a friendly woman in her late 20s who had trained on Earth before coming to the colonies. She was fascinated by Jake's travels and asked detailed questions about the different environments he had visited. "You must have built up immunity to all kinds of diseases," Kim said, looking genuinely impressed, living alone in space for months at a time, visiting unknown planets. That takes real courage. Next, they visited Captain Rosa Chen, the head of security. Rosa was tough and professional, but she warmed up quickly when Lisa introduced Jake. She showed him the station's defense systems and explained how they protected themselves from pirates and hostile aliens. "We don't get many threats out here," Rosa said, "but when we do, we need to be ready. Having more people around makes everything safer." Finally, they met engineer Amy Thompson in the workshop where Jake's ship was being repaired. Amy was covered in grease and looked frustrated as she worked on his engine. "This is going to take longer than I thought," Amy said, wiping her hands on a rag. "The damage is worse than it looked at first. I need to order some special parts, and the next supply ship won't be here for at least a week." Jake's heart sank. He had planned to leave in a day or two, but now he was stuck for much longer. Lisa put a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry about it. You can use the extra time to go through more of our research data. And honestly, it's nice having someone new around to talk to. Over the next few days, Jake settled into life on the station. Everyone was incredibly welcoming and helpful. Kim gave him a complete health checkup and declared him to be in excellent condition. Rosa showed him how to use the station's exercise equipment and even taught him some basic self-defense moves. Amy let him help with small repairs around the station, saying it was good to have an extra pair of hands. But it was Lisa who spent the most time with him. She joined him for meals, showed him how different experiments worked, and shared stories about her life in the colonies. Jake found himself enjoying her company more and more each day. One evening, as they sat in the observation deck looking out at the stars, Lisa brought up something that had been bothering her. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" she said, her voice unusually serious. "Sure. What is it? Aren't you worried about traveling alone out here?" "I mean, really worried?" Jake shrugged. "I've been doing it for years. I'm careful, and I know how to take care of myself." Lisa shook her head. "That was before. Things are different now. There are colonies out there that haven't seen a human male in years. Some of them have gotten desperate, if you know what I mean." Jake didn't know what she meant, but something in her tone made him uncomfortable. "What are you trying to say?" Lisa looked out at the stars for a long moment before answering. "There are stories, colonies that have captured travelers, forced them to stay. They tell themselves they're doing it for the greater good, for the future of humanity. But really, they're just scared and lonely." She turned to look at him directly. "You're valuable, Jake, more valuable than you realize, and that makes you a target." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to protect you," Lisa said firmly. "Look, I know this place isn't exciting. We don't have the best food or the most comfortable rooms, but we're good people here. We care about you as a person, not just as someone who can solve our problems." The conversation stuck with Jake over the next few days. He started paying more attention to how the women on the station treated him. They were all incredibly kind and helpful. But there was something else there too. Something that felt like they were all invested in keeping him happy and comfortable. Amy gave him daily updates on his ship's repairs, but there always seemed to be some new problem that needed fixing. Kim insisted on regular health checks, saying she wanted to make sure he was handling the stress of being away from Earth. Rosa started teaching him advanced security procedures, claiming it was important for his safety when he traveled. Even the station's cook, Mrs. Davis, started making special meals just for him. She would ask what he wanted to eat and then spend hours preparing elaborate dishes. That, she said, reminded her of home. Jake appreciated all the attention, but it was starting to feel overwhelming. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what was best for him, what he should do, where he should go. When he mentioned to Lisa that he was thinking about continuing his journey once his ship was ready, her reaction surprised him. "You can't be serious," she said, looking genuinely upset. "After everything I've told you about the dangers out there, Lisa, I have work to do. People are counting on me to deliver my research." "What people? You said yourself you work alone most of the time. Who's going to miss you if something happens?" The question hit Jake harder than he expected. It was true that he didn't have close relationships back on Earth. His work had always come first, and he had gotten used to being alone. Lisa seemed to realize she had said something hurtful. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I just mean that you have people here who care about you now, people who want you to be safe and happy." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He walked through the station's quiet corridors, thinking about everything that had happened since he arrived. The repairs on his ship were taking much longer than they should have. Everyone was being incredibly nice to him, almost too nice. And Lisa's warnings about other colonies were starting to sound less like helpful advice and more like reasons why he shouldn't leave. He found himself in the workshop where his ship was docked. Amy wasn't there, so he decided to take a look at the repairs himself. He knew enough about engines to understand what needed to be fixed. What he saw confused him. The parts that Amy said were broken looked fine to him. In fact, his engine appeared to be in better condition than when he had arrived. Some components had actually been upgraded with newer, better parts. Jake stood there for a long time, staring at his ship and trying to understand what was happening. Either Amy was the worst mechanic in the galaxy, or she was deliberately keeping his ship here longer than necessary. The next morning, he decided to test his theory. He asked Amy directly when his ship would be ready to fly. "Oh, at least another week," she said without looking up from her work. "Maybe 2. These old transport engines are tricky, and I want to make sure everything is perfect before you head back out into space. Can I take a look at the work you've done?" Amy's hands stopped moving for just a moment. "Sure, but there's not much to see right now. Most of the problems are internal." She showed him round the engine, pointing to various components and explaining what needed to be fixed. To someone who didn't know engines, it would have sounded convincing. But Jake had been maintaining his own ship for years. Everything Amy was telling him was a lie. That afternoon, Jake found Lisa in her office and confronted her directly. "How long have you known that my ship is actually fine?" Lisa looked up from her computer, and for a moment, Jake saw something flash across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear of being caught. "What are you talking about?" "Amy's been lying about the repairs. My ship could have been ready to leave days ago." Lisa was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and sad. "Jake, I need you to understand something. This station, these people, we're barely hanging on out here. We're trying to build something, to create a future, but we're missing a crucial piece. So you decided to trap me here. I decided to give you time to see what we could offer you. Time to realize that maybe what you're looking for isn't out there, among the stars, but right here with people who genuinely care about you." Jake felt a mix of anger and disappointment. He had started to trust Lisa, to think of her as a friend, maybe even something more. "You lied to me. I protected you," Lisa said firmly. "Do you have any idea what some of the other colonies would do if they found you? At least here, you're safe. At least here, you're treated with respect." Jake realized that his situation had become much more complicated than he had thought. These weren't bad people, but they had made a decision about his life without asking him, and despite their good intentions, he was starting to feel less like a guest and more like a prisoner. Jake spent the next 3 days thinking about his conversation with Lisa. He tried to act normal around everyone, but inside he was planning his next move. He needed to figure out how to get off the station without causing a big confrontation. The problem was that everyone was watching him now, not obviously, but he could feel their eyes on him wherever he went. Kim always seemed to appear when he was walking alone through the corridors. Rosa made sure to check on him several times a day. Amy always had some excuse to be near his ship when he visited the workshop, even Mrs. Davis. The cook started asking him detailed questions about his daily routine. She said she wanted to make sure he was eating well, but Jake suspected she was really keeping track of his movements. One morning, Jake decided to test just how closely they were monitoring him. He told Lisa he was going to spend the day in the archives, but instead he went to the workshop to examine his ship more carefully. Within an hour, Lisa showed up. "I thought you were doing research today," she said, trying to sound casual. "I changed my mind. I wanted to see how the repairs were going." Lisa nodded, but Jake could see she wasn't happy about his change of plans. That evening, Lisa invited him to dinner in her quarters again. This time, the conversation was different. She wasn't just being friendly anymore. She was making a proposal. "Jake, I've been thinking a lot about our situation here," she began as they finished eating. "About what would be best for everyone involved." Jake waited for her to continue, but he had a feeling he wasn't going to like what she was about to say. "I think you should stay here permanently, not as a prisoner or anything like that, but as a partner, as part of our community." She had clearly thought this through carefully. She explained how he could continue his research using their archives and the samples they collected. He would have unlimited resources and a team of skilled scientists to work with. Most importantly, he would be safe and protected. And in return, Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer, Lisa hesitated in return. You would help us build a future. You would be part of something bigger than just your individual research. She was talking about children, though she was being careful not to say it directly. She wanted him to help repopulate the station, to be the father of the next generation. Lisa, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't just abandon my life because you think it's better for me to stay here. What life? Lisa asked, her voice becoming more intense. You told me yourself that you spend most of your time alone. You don't have close relationships or a permanent home here. You would have both. Jake stood up from the table. That's my choice to make, not yours. Lisa stood up too, and for the first time, Jake saw real desperation in her eyes. Jake, please, just think about it. Give us a chance to show you what we can offer. I've already decided, Lisa. As soon as my ship is ready, I'm leaving. The next morning, Jake went straight to the workshop to talk to Amy. He was done playing games. I know my ship is ready to fly, he said without any introduction. I want you to stop pretending there are problems that don't exist. Amy looked uncomfortable. She glanced around the workshop like she was hoping someone would come and help her. Jake, I'm just being thorough. You don't want your ship breaking down in the middle of nowhere, do you? My ship was fine when I got here. You've had 3 weeks to check it over. Either fix whatever's actually broken or give me back my ship. Amy was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed deeply. I can't do that, Jake. Lisa's orders. At least she was finally being honest. So I'm a prisoner here. You're a guest, a very important guest who we want to keep safe. Jake realized that talking to Amy wasn't going to get him anywhere. She was following orders, not making decisions. That afternoon, he tried a different approach. He went to Rose's office and asked her directly about leaving the station, hypothetically. He said, if I wanted to leave tomorrow, what would happen? Rosa leaned back in her chair and studied his face carefully. Hypothetically, I would have to consider whether that was in the best interest of station security. What does that mean? It means that someone traveling alone through dangerous space is a security risk. If something happened to you and people found out you had been here, it could bring unwanted attention to our station. Jake was starting to understand how they were justifying this to themselves. They weren't kidnapping him. They were protecting him. They weren't keeping him prisoner. They were ensuring everyone's safety. And if I insisted on leaving anyway, Rose's expression became very serious. I would have to evaluate whether you were making that decision with a clear mind or whether you were being influenced by some kind of mental distress. The threat was polite but clear. If Jake tried to leave, they would claim he wasn't thinking straight. They would say they were protecting him from himself. That night, Jake barely slept. He kept thinking about how the situation had changed so gradually. At first, everyone had been genuinely kind and welcoming, but somewhere along the way, their kindness had become control. He decided to make one more attempt to reason with Lisa. Maybe if he could make her understand how he felt, she would change her mind. The next morning, he found her in the observation deck where they had talked several times before. Lisa, I need you to listen to me, he began. I understand why you want me to stay. I understand that you think it's what's best for everyone, but you're wrong. Lisa turned to face him, and Jake could see that she had been crying. Am I wrong? Really? Or are you just scared of commitment, of being responsible for something bigger than yourself? This isn't about commitment. This is about choice. You've taken away my right to choose what happens to my own life. I've given you options. Good options. A chance to be part of something meaningful instead of just wandering around space by yourself. Until you get old and die alone, Jake realized that Lisa genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. In her mind, she was saving him from a life of loneliness and giving him purpose. The fact that it wasn't what he wanted didn't seem to matter to her. What if I promised to visit regularly? Jake asked, trying to find some middle ground. I could come back here between research trips. You could still be part of my life, and I could still be part of yours. Lisa shook her head. It's too dangerous. Every time you left, you might not come back. I can't live with that uncertainty. But that's what life is, Lisa. Uncertainty, risk, freedom to make your own mistakes. Not anymore. Lisa said firmly, not when every human life is precious. Not when losing one person could mean the difference between survival and extinction. For a whole community, Jake realized that this conversation wasn't going to change anything. Lisa had made up her mind, and she wasn't going to be swayed by his arguments. That afternoon, Jake made a decision. If he couldn't convince them to let him leave, he would have to find another way. He went to the workshop during Amy's lunch break and started working on his ship. He knew enough about engines to bypass some of the artificial problems Amy had created. It wouldn't be a perfect fix, but it might be enough to get him to the next system. He had been working for about an hour when he heard footsteps behind him. I was wondering when you would try this, Lisa said softly. Jake turned around to see her standing in the doorway with Rosa and two other security officers. Lisa, please, don't do this. I'm sorry, Jake. I really am. But I can't let you leave. Not like this. Rosa stepped forward. Jake, please step away from the ship. Jake looked around the workshop, trying to think of some way out of the situation. But there were too many of them, and he had nowhere to go. As the security officers escorted him out of the workshop, Jake heard Amy working on his ship behind him. She was undoing all the repairs he had just made, making sure his ship would be stuck on the station for even longer. That night, as Jake sat in his room trying to figure out what to do next, he realized that his situation had become much worse than he had imagined. These people weren't just trying to convince him to stay. They were willing to use force to keep him here. The golden cage Lisa had built for him was about to become a real prison. Jake spent the next 2 days in his room, barely eating and refusing to talk to anyone. Lisa came by several times, trying to convince him that everything would work out fine. But Jake just stared at the wall and didn't respond. On the 3rd day, he decided he had had enough. If they were going to keep him here against his will, at least everyone on the station should know what was really happening. Jake walked to the main meeting room where the station's leadership council held their weekly meetings. He knew they would all be there, discussing supply schedules and research projects like nothing unusual was happening. When Jake entered the room, all conversations stopped. Lisa, Rosa, Kim, Amy, and 3 other department heads looked up at him. In surprise, Jake, Lisa said, standing up quickly, you should be resting. You've been under a lot of stress lately. I want to talk to everyone, Jake said firmly, about what's really going on here. Rosa moved toward the door, probably planning to block his exit if necessary. But Kim gestured for her to sit back down. Let him talk, Kim said. I think we all need to hear this. Jake took a deep breath and began to explain everything that had happened since he arrived. He told them about the fake ship repairs, the constant monitoring, and Lisa's proposal that he stay permanently. He explained how his simple request to leave had been turned into a security issue. I came here as a traveler looking for help, Jake said. Now I'm being treated like a prisoner, and you're all pretending it's for my own good. The room was completely silent when he finished. Everyone looked uncomfortable, but no one seemed surprised by what he had said. Finally, Dr. Reyes, the station's deputy administrator, spoke up. Jake, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. No one wants to keep you here against your will. We're just concerned about your safety. Then let me leave, Jake said simply. It's not that simple, Lisa interrupted. There are factors you don't understand, responsibilities we all have to consider. What responsibilities? To who? Lisa stood up and walked to the front of the room. Jake could see she had prepared for this moment. To the future of humanity in this sector, she said, Jake, you represent hope for dozens of communities out here. These people have families, children who need to know that civilization will continue. She began talking about population statistics, about communities that were slowly dying out, about the bigger picture that Jake couldn't see because he was focused on his own individual wants. One person's freedom versus the survival of thousands of people, Lisa continued. How is that even a choice? Jake felt his anger rising. Because those thousands of people don't get to vote on what happens to my life. You don't get to sacrifice me for some greater good that I never agreed to be part of. Amy shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Jake, no one's talking about sacrifice. We're talking about opportunity. A chance for you to be part of something meaningful. By force, Jake said. By lying to me and trapping me here. Dr. Reyes cleared her throat. Perhaps we made some mistakes in how we handled this situation, but the underlying issue remains the same. Jake, you have skills and attributes that these communities desperately need. Jake looked around the room at all these intelligent, capable women who had convinced themselves that his individual rights didn't matter as much as their collective needs. What if I was a woman? Jake asked. Would you trap a female scientist? Here because you needed her skills? The question seemed to catch them off guard. Several people looked down at the table, unable to meet his eyes. Kim was the first to respond. That's different, Jake. You know it's different. How? How is it different? Because women can't solve the population problem, Rosa said bluntly. We need men for that. Specifically, we need you. The honesty was startling. At least they were finally admitting what this was really about. Jake felt something break inside him, the stress of the past few weeks, the constant pressure, the feeling of being trapped. All came crashing down at once. I can't breathe, he said, grabbing the edge of the table. I can't. I need air. His chest felt tight, and his vision started to blur. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Kim immediately jumped up and came over to him. Jake, you're having a panic attack. Just breathe slowly, in and out. But Jake couldn't slow down his breathing. The room felt like it was spinning, and he felt like he was going to pass out. Get him to the medical bay, Kim ordered. Now, as Rosa and Amy helped Jake walk to the medical facility, he could hear Lisa behind them, her voice shaking. This is what I was trying to prevent, she said. This is why I wanted to keep him safe in the medical bay. Kim gave Jake something to help him calm down. As his breathing slowly returned to normal, he looked up to see Lisa sitting in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted this, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. For the first time since this whole thing started, Jake saw Lisa as she really was. Not the confident scientist who always had a plan, but a scared, lonely woman who was desperate to save her community and had lost sight of everything else in the process. Then why? Jake asked weakly. Why are you doing this to me? Lisa wiped her eyes and came over to sit beside his bed. Because I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm terrified that we're all going to die out here, forgotten and alone. I'm terrified that everything we've worked for will disappear. And when you showed up, for the first time in years, I thought maybe we had a chance. She told him about the friends she had lost when they moved back to the core worlds. About watching her community slowly shrink year after year. About lying awake at night wondering if she was the last generation of humans who would ever live on this station. I convinced myself that keeping you here was the right thing to do, Lisa said. That your individual happiness was less important than our survival. But seeing you like this, I realized I've become the kind of person I never wanted to be. Jake could see that Lisa was genuinely struggling with what she had done. She wasn't evil. Just desperate and scared. Dr. Reyes appeared in the doorway. How is he? He'll be fine, Kim said. But we need to talk, all of us, over the next hour. The station's leadership had the most honest conversation they had had in months. Kim spoke up first, saying that she couldn't support keeping Jake against his will, regardless of what they thought was best for the community. We're supposed to be building a civilization out here, Kim said. Civilizations are based on consent and respect for individual rights. If we abandon those principles, what exactly are we trying to save? Amy admitted that she had been uncomfortable with the deception from the beginning, but had gone along with it because she trusted Lisa's judgment. I thought if we just showed Jake how good life could be here, he would choose to stay, Amy said. I didn't realize we were taking away his ability to choose. Dr. Reyes was more conflicted. She understood the practical arguments for keeping Jake, but she also recognized that their methods had been wrong. Maybe there's a middle ground. She suggested some way to address both Jake's needs and our community's needs. Rosa remained quiet through most of the discussion, as head of security. She was used to making hard choices that other people didn't like. But even she seemed troubled by how things had developed. "The question is," Rosa finally said, "what do we do now? We can't undo what we've done. We can't take back the lies or the manipulation. So where do we go from here?" Lisa looked at Jake, who was still lying on the medical bed, exhausted from his panic attack. "We give him back his choice," she said quietly. "We fix his ship, and we let him decide what he wants to do. And if he chooses to leave," Dr. Reyes asked, "then he leaves," Lisa said. Though Jake could see how much the words cost her. "And we figure out another way to build our future." Jake closed his eyes and tried to process everything that had happened. These people had lied to him, manipulated him, and tried to control his life. But they had also shown him genuine care and affection, even if it was expressed in the wrong way. The question now was whether they could find a way forward that respected everyone's needs, or whether too much damage had already been done. As Jake drifted off to sleep, he could hear Lisa in the hallway, giving orders to have his ship repaired immediately, for the first time in weeks. It seemed like he might actually have a choice in what happened next. Jake woke up the next morning to find Amy working on his ship. This time, she was actually fixing things instead of breaking them. She had already replaced several worn-out components and was running diagnostics on the navigation system. "How long until it's ready?" Jake asked. Amy looked up from her work, her face serious. 6 hours. "Maybe 8. I'm doing this right this time." Jake nodded and walked back to his room. He had a lot of thinking to do. Around noon, Lisa knocked on his door. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept at all. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I need to say some things." Jake let her in, though he wasn't sure he was ready for another confrontation. Lisa sat down in the chair across from his bed and was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different than it had been before. Softer, more vulnerable. "I owe you an apology," she began. "Not just for what I did, but for how I justified it to myself. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that I was doing what was best for everyone. But really, I was just scared of losing something good that had come into my life." She told him about her childhood on Earth, about her dreams of exploring space and building new communities among the stars. She had come to this station 5 years ago, full of hope and excitement about the future. Then the virus hit, and everything changed. Lisa said, "I watched friends leave, one by one. I saw communities that had taken decades to build just disappear. And I started to feel like I was fighting a losing battle." She explained how she had thrown herself into her work, trying to make the station as successful as possible, trying to prove that life in the outer colonies could work. But deep down, she had started to lose hope. "When you arrived, it was like seeing sunlight after years of darkness," Lisa said. "For the first time in ages, I could imagine a real future for this place. And I became so focused on protecting that possibility that I forgot about protecting you." Jake listened without interrupting. He could see that Lisa was being completely honest with him, maybe for the first time since he had arrived. "I know I hurt you," Lisa continued. "I know I took away your freedom and your trust. And I know that saying sorry doesn't fix any of that. But I want you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." Jake was quiet for a long time. Part of him was still angry about what had happened, but another part of him understood why Lisa had acted the way she did. "Lisa, I get that you were scared. I get that you felt responsible for everyone here. But you can't build a future by trapping people. You can't create a community based on fear and control. I know that now," Lisa said. "The question is, what do we do about it?" That afternoon, Jake took a walk around the station. He talked to Kim, who apologized for not speaking up sooner. He talked to Rosa, who admitted she had let her duty to the station override her respect for his rights. He even talked to Mrs. Davis, who said she had just wanted him to feel welcome and hadn't realized how her attention was contributing to the pressure he felt. Everyone seemed genuinely sorry about what had happened, But Jake could also see that they were all hoping he would decide to stay. As evening approached, Amy found him in the observation deck. "Your ship is ready," she said. "Everything's working perfectly. Better than it was when you arrived, actually." Jake thanked her and asked when he could leave. "Whenever you want," Amy said. "Tonight, tomorrow morning, whenever." But she didn't walk away immediately. She stood there looking out at the stars, clearly wanting to say something else. "Jake, I know we messed this up, all of us. But I want you to know that everything we said about caring about you was true. We just got confused about how to show it that night." Lisa came to see him one more time. She didn't try to convince him to stay or make any more arguments about why leaving was dangerous. Instead, she just wanted to talk. "If you do decide to leave," she said, "I want you to know that you'll always be welcome here. Not because of what you can do for us, but because of who you are." She handed him a data pad with information about safe routes through this sector of space, contacts at friendly stations, and resources that might be useful for his research. "I also want you to know that what happened here has changed how we do things," Lisa said. "We're going to establish new rules about how we treat visitors, guidelines that protect people's freedom while still allowing us to build relationships." Jake looked at the data pad and realized that Lisa was giving him something she had never offered before: complete freedom to choose. "Lisa, can I ask you something? Of course, if I did decide to stay, what would that look like? I mean, really. No pressure, no hidden expectations, just honest partnership." Lisa thought carefully before answering. "It would mean you could continue your research with our support. You could travel when you wanted to, but you'd have a home base here. You could be part of our community without being responsible for saving it." She paused. "And if you wanted, we could explore what a personal relationship between us might look like, but only if that's what you genuinely wanted, not because you felt obligated or pressured." Jake spent most of that night awake, thinking about his options. He could leave in the morning and continue his original plan. He had his freedom back. His ship was ready, and no one would try to stop him. But he had also found something here that he hadn't expected: a group of people who cared about him, even if they had shown it in the wrong way. A chance to be part of something bigger than just his individual research. The next morning, Jake made his decision. He found Lisa in her office, preparing reports as if it was just another normal day. "I've thought about your offer," Jake said. Lisa looked up, trying to hide her hope and nervousness. "I want to try something," Jake continued. "I want to stay here for 6 months. Not as a prisoner, not as someone who's been manipulated into staying, but as someone who's choosing to be part of this community." Lisa's face lit up, but Jake held up his hand. "But there have to be conditions, real conditions that protect both of us." Jake had worked out a detailed agreement. He would spend 6 months helping with research and getting to know the community better. After that, he would leave for 3 months to continue his individual work and to prove to both of them that this was a choice, not a trap. "If, after a year of this arrangement, we both think it's working, we can talk about something more permanent," Jake said. "But it has to be based on trust and respect, not fear and desperation." Lisa agreed immediately. More than that, she suggested they formalize the agreement and share it with the entire station, so everyone would understand the new boundaries. Over the following months, Jake discovered that the station was a very different place when he was there by choice instead of by force. People treated him as a colleague and friend rather than a precious resource that needed to be protected. He and Lisa developed a relationship that was based on genuine affection rather than need. They worked together on research projects, shared meals and conversations, and slowly built the trust that had been damaged during his first weeks on the station. Most importantly, Jake never felt trapped. He knew that his ship was ready whenever he wanted to use it, and that knowledge made all the difference in how he felt about staying. When his 6 months were up, Jake did leave for 3 months as planned. He completed his research onto other planets and even visited Earth to deliver some of his findings. But he found himself thinking about Station 47 and the people there more often than he expected. When he returned, It felt like coming home. A year later, Jake and Lisa were married, in a ceremony attended by the entire station. But more importantly, they had helped establish a new model for how isolated communities could build relationships with travelers without resorting to coercion or manipulation. Jake's story became known throughout the sector as an example of how to balance individual freedom with community needs. Other stations started adopting similar agreements, creating networks of mutual support rather than isolated, desperate communities. And Jake discovered that sometimes the best way to find freedom is to choose to share it with people who truly understand its value. Years later, when other travelers found themselves in situations similar to what Jake had experienced, they knew there were places they could go, where they would be welcomed as people, not as solutions to problems, where they could choose to be part of something larger than themselves, without giving up who they were. The station thrived, not because they had captured someone to save them, but because they had learned to offer something worth choosing, and that made all the difference.